Hey guys, I'll get to the podcast in a minute. It's the end of the year. It's been a full year, a good year. And I wanted to give you a heads up on what's coming and just a brief breakdown of what's happened. First, we've got a couple more podcasts that we'll release to finish out the year. This is our 5th season. Unbelievable. Second, in January, I won't be releasing any podcasts. Doesn't mean I won't be recording them. I'm going to put a whole lot of them in the can. Next year is going to be full as well, and I'm hopeful to get a head start. So January, there won't be any new podcasts. There'll still be the Facebook group, lots of community taking place there, but no new podcasts as I ramp up for season 6. I am blown away by the fact that I get to do this. As you can see, nighttime here, recording this on my back porch, one of my favorite places to work. I am editing as well. Grateful for all the help that's come along over the last couple of years. J.D. Cobb has been really helpful. J.D. Cobb Productions, check him out. Bryant Spratlin, who's helped with resourcing content for our Instagram, as well as building the new rethinkinggodwithtacos.com website. Check it out. Christian Raffetto, who has helped us with our rebrand. So thankful to him. And Dale Howie, who runs our Tacos Coffee Cafe community Zoom groups on Thursdays at 9 a.m. Central and Sundays 5 p.m. Central. It's a beautiful group. You should check it out. And the moderators on our Facebook, thank you guys. So grateful. And my daughter Madeline, who runs the Instagram page. And of course, Brooke Waters, who helps me with basically everything. That said, I'm still on my back porch late at night, burning the midnight oil to try and get you guys a podcast. And so I want to bring up end of year. We're listener supported, and I'm so thankful for folks who've partnered with us to give. I'm grateful for those that give one-time gifts, and I'm also thankful for those that do something monthly. Monthly is nice because it helps us strategize and plan, but grateful for all of it. We are a nonprofit, so you can go to afamilystory.org, and that's where you can partner with us in giving. It's also where you can sign up for our mailing list, stay up to speed on all the things that we're doing. Listen, we create media content that's catalytic for an encounter with the love of God. This podcast is our flagship. It's the forerunner. But there's lots of articles, books. I am working on a book, I promise you. It was supposed to be done at the end of the year, a Rethinking God with Tacos book. I am working on it. And I'm also working on a film. I'm going to share more about that in the coming weeks and months. But if you go to afamilystory.org, sign up for our mailing list, you'll be kept up to speed on all things A Family Story. That said, I am grateful for this year, grateful for all of the folks that I've gotten to meet, the travel that I've gotten to do. The tacos people around the world is amazing. The group on Facebook is amazing. I want to tell you, if you compile all the ways by which you can consume this podcast, whether it's Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Facebook, we've just hit 1 million views. That blows me away. Around the world. I had the opportunity this year to film 52 episodes of Across All Worlds with Baxter Kruger. And my goodness, has that been life-giving for me. But also I believe it's impacting in profound ways and will impact for years to come. These conversations are formative and powerful. We did that show for GAN TV. We also have a Rethinking God with Tacos GAN television show where we will have released 52 episodes within the span of a year. This year has been a year of connection and breakthrough and trust, ultimately culminating in our first Rethinking God with Tacos conference, which we hope to do again next year. That's connected to provision, and we'll see in the coming months what that looks like. Blown away by this year, and I am grateful. So I just wish you a Merry Christmas this season that's coming, a Happy New Year. We got a couple more podcasts, and then we're going to take a break. That said, this podcast is a bonus one. It was something we recorded earlier in the year where Bryant hosted me. We were going to go through all of my books this year and only got through the first one before I got fuller than I could handle. Bryant interviewed me around my book, Prone to Love, which I bought the rights back from the publisher who I felt had been held hostage to for the last couple of years. And so I have the rights to my book, Prone to Love. and I plan on writing a revised, expanded edition next year and releasing it. Very excited about that. That's been an answer to prayer. That's one of my favorite books, and Bryant interviewed me around the book. And because I have been unable to edit some of the podcasts that are in the can over the last couple of weeks, I wanted to give you something, and I decided to go ahead and release this one. It is around my book, Prone to Love. I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins over to Bryant. But I love you guys, grateful for you, and I pray grace and wonder over you today. Hey, Bryant.
Hey, how's it going, man?
It's going good, man. So, what's up?
It's weird doing an intro after we've already, did the podcast. That's a little weird. I don't know how you come back and do that. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
I know.
This was fun.
It was great to just be able to steal the wheel for a minute and talk about your books, Prone to Love. It was a great starting book for my journey. So it was great to get to talk about it with you,
bro. I loved this conversation, and we probably could have kept going for another hour. We dove into my book, Prone to Love. It's part of this series where we're diving into all of our books, and Bryant has hosted this. Bro, you killed it, man. We only got to maybe half of the questions, if that you'd outlined, but we kept the ball rolling, man.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, people need to get the book if they want to get the full picture of everything we didn't get to.
Yeah. But we did get to union. We got to grace. We talked about the supernatural and miraculous. And I think maybe one of the deeper conversations we've had on the podcast around miracles and signs and wonders. That was at the end, but I felt juice on it. You had some fresh revelation. And so that was fun. We touched on my journey, how this book came to be. You talk about this being the first of a trilogy. That's the front end of this. That was good. I agree with that. And my grandma, she made the cut.
Yeah. So, yeah. She's the star of the book, in my opinion.
Yeah. And she's the reason that it's titled Prone to Love. Yeah, we dove into the early days of my discovery of union. And bro, I love some of the thoughts you had, the insights you had as well. It's fun to be hosted instead of the host. Suddenly I didn't feel bad about talking too much.
I know, that's good. We need to get you talking more.
That's good, bro. You too. Thankful for you. I say it at the end of this, but I'm so grateful to Bryant. We've been friends for 5+ years and gotten a lot closer over the last year. In fact, we're about to go to an event where we're going to be in an Airbnb together, hanging out with Baxter Kruger and John Crowder. JD Cobb's going to be there. A pile of other folks. You've been going to this conference for a while, so I'm excited to. We're like 10 days away from like just face to face, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. We'll be there together soon.
Yeah, it's good. All right, this is the part where you say, "Hey guys, now," because you're the host. You know.
All right, now you guys join us for this podcast with author Jason Clark as we dive into his book, Prone to Love.
Love it.
It's been so long since I read Surrendered and Untamed, but I think anybody that's deconstructing, or at any point of the journey, I feel like you almost have like a 3-series workbook of taking them down the journey. Like wherever they're at in their journey, if they're just starting and they feel nervous about it, like Prone to Love is a great place to start. Because you're saying some bold things for people in the evangelical world, but people in the evangelical world could still say yes and amen to it. And then God is not in control. You're stepping on a few more toes, but you're still not fully saying what you're saying and leaving and finding Jesus. So it just feels like if you have somebody that is on the train, or you're having a family member that thinks now you're the heretic and you want to introduce them slowly, like maybe they're open-minded, like start with Prone to Love. Because I see so much of the seeds of God is not in control throughout that book, because you talk so much about control. And I don't know if you already had God is not in control planned or not, but or if that's just the natural of where the next revelation came from that. But
I actually see Prone to Love, God is not in control, and Leaving and Finding Jesus as a trilogy. with if you wanted to have a prelude or in Surrendered and Untamed, that it would be fun to maybe go back and discover. But I agree with you. And what's interesting is, and I don't know if I told you this, but I had a chapter in Prone to Love titled "God is Not in Control."
Oh, I didn't know that.
And I was sending it out for endorsements and sending it out to get feedback before we went to the final print. And the pastor that I was serving under at the Methodist Church, amazing, gracious, way out of his comfort zone to do this, but he pushed back and said, "Jason, not only can I not endorse this, but if you don't change that, I'll have to distance myself from you." Yeah, which was funny because I was on staff, so I was like, "Well, what does that look like?
What does that mean?"
But what it did, honestly, it really, really helped because he wasn't wrong. What it did is it helped me realize, okay, it's too soon, and it's a rabbit hole that requires a whole lot more care and attention than a chapter that touches on it and moves on. And so here's what I did. I went into that chapter and I changed the 4 or 5 places plus the title where it says God is not in control. And I said, God is not controlling. Handed it back to him. Nothing else changed. All the takeaways the same. Handed it back to him. And he gushed. He was like, I can get on board with this 100%. Thank you for doing it. And I think he was relieved also that and he felt heard. And I was fascinated because I was like, if he's not controlling, then do the math.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So for me, I was absolutely fascinated by the fact that one tweak settled his heart. But it's what led to as you begin to dream into what you want to go after next. Obviously, 5 years later, God is Not in Control is the literal title of a book. And to wrap that story up, he's such a great guy and a relational guy that I sat in his office. I'm no longer on staff, and we're catching up. And as we're finishing up, and this was like 5 years ago, I lean over and I hand him God is Not in Control. And I said, I signed it for you. And he opened up and he read the signature, said, everything I've written in this book, I learned from. And I put his name in there, and then I signed it. He got a kick out of that.
Oh, that's funny.
But I was like, I'm going to put it right here on your shelf. And I put it right like front and center, face out on his shelf. But so he's a great guy, great sense of humor. But yeah, I agree. These 3 books to me are steps. And this one, I think you're right. You can say yes and amen all along the way. This book, Prone to Love. Yeah. Anyway.
Yes, I think that
I'm jazzed to talk about it, man.
To people is, I think, critical just for them to hear that. But then there's just so many things in there that I think about coming out of a charismatic background that I see a lot of your story, but you see missing a lot on the other side. Yeah. Like on this other side of the deconstruction, you don't see many people talking about prophetic words of knowledge, praying for healing for people. Like,
right.
There's definitely more of the Prone to Love, like the running from cops inside this on the deconstruction side. But that charismatic side is not, I don't see that a lot. Like, even in people that are maybe bigger names in this movement, like a Brian Zond or Brad Jersak or a Baxter, even a John Crowder. He's probably more out there than a lot. But even still, there's no Kenneth Hagin and Oral Roberts that's focused on like signs and wonders on this side of deconstruction that I've come across. So that's one thing that I thought you talk a lot about that in Prone to Love, or not a lot, but enough to like make me think, I wonder how you would bridge that on this side. And I think that could be, for people coming out of a charismatic background, that could be helpful to hear that they're not having to throw away their speaking in tongues and praying for signs and wonders and stuff like that.
Yeah. What does a life of union look like? And I think it looks like shadows healing people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would love to spend time there. It's an area where there's still a tension in me too, because I've not seen what I believe we're invited into, and I'm Yeah. Have we started?
Well, I didn't know.
Do we
I
want to officially
thought,
now?
I mean, we can officially start now. I was just was kind of more telling you the couple of things that like those 2 points, and then I think the third point of like how do we unlearn or even just I was thinking a lot about the story of your grandma, which I told you I think about a lot, and then I also how that ties into your oscillating God, and how maybe we're taking revelations that
Yeah.
we heard it for a season. And that was the other thing I like, because I remember you talking about how God stopped talking to you for those 2 years, right?
Yeah.
Like while you were in that season,
Yeah.
it was as if God stopped talking. But I'd wondered now on this side, would you still use that same language to describe that season? Or would your language have changed now? Because I feel like we always get different perspective of seasons on, the back end of like, oh, this is where you actually were. I just couldn't see it. So it felt, so that was another one. And it may still be the same language, but I was just curious about that too. That was kind of the three, I guess the main points.
Let's do it.
If I was to distill it down into three.
I can roll with that, and I can retell the story if you want, but let's do it, man. I'm excited. Well, we're rolling. So,
Cool.
Hey, Bryant.
Hey, brother.
How you doing, man?
I'm good. I feel like
We've
so
already
much
been-
of this pre stuff. You need a behind the scenes of the podcast.
We've been talking for already rolling for 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We're doing this, bro.
Yeah, it's exciting.
You're the host today.
That's somebody giving me a will to anything is dangerous.
Guys, Bryant Spratlin has become a good friend in the last couple of years. In the last year in particular, we've gotten to know each other really well. But I think how far back? I mean, you've been on the podcast.
Yeah.
And how far back? 5 years?
Whenever you first released God is Not in Control, that's our first connection point.
Okay. Yeah. So 5+ years. So that's been out for just over 5 years. Wild, dude. And we'll get to that book. But this is a particular series that we kicked off with Brooke and I around my first book, Surrendered and Untamed, and working through them chronologically. This idea of diving into these books, which are about 5 years apart. My books are about 5 years apart. That's how long it takes for me, 4 to 5 years to figure it out. So, to Prone to Love, which you're the one carrying the show for this.
Yeah, I got it. It's right here. Prone to Love. I got it on Audible, and I got it right here. So we can look at our copies. If you can't. Podcast people can't see it. If they're watching on YouTube, you can see the book.
That's right. Yeah. It's a picture of a guy with a billboard on his back, and it says prone to wander, and then the wander is X'd out, and he's put love below it. So there's a little more going on there.
Yeah. Cool. So we're ready to just jump in, right? And I get so I'm hosting. So welcome.
Yeah, dude. Let's do this.
Welcome, Jason, to Rethinking God with Tacos.
Thanks, Bryant. Good to be
here. One
here.
thing that I want to make sure that people know, and we can talk about a little bit about, really, you have 4 books, but you've mentioned this, and I felt like that even reading the last 3 books of Prone to Love, God is Not in Control, and Leaving and Finding Jesus is really like a trilogy or even a guide to the deconstructionist. It's almost like this workbook that you could give someone that is on the journey if they're just dipping their toes in and they're coming out of the evangelical world and they're curious. You hand them Prone to Love and they're going to say yes and amen and be stretched a little bit. And if they're a little bit further down the journey, you give them God is Not in Control. They're going to be stretched a lot a bit, and they're also going to be able to say yes and amen. And then if they're at the point where they're at a spot of really tearing it all down, Leaving and Finding Jesus is like a great way to stay attached to the chief cornerstone. So like you always say, not really a question in there, but take that wherever you want and just how you see that as a trilogy and how that can be impactful to even just hand someone that is going on their own journey.
Yeah, I love that. And Leaving and Finding Jesus is where they just call me a heretic if you get to that too soon. But no, I agree with you, man. I actually have thought of these books as a trilogy, and then, like Prone to Love, God is Not in Control, and Leaving and Finding Jesus. I was referring to them as I was wrapping up that third book. I told my wife, I didn't know I was doing it, but I've written a trilogy, and you could put it all under the title of Sovereign Love, if you would. But of course, that's a phrase that really begins to come to light in the second book. And if you were to talk about Surrendered and Untamed, which I just dove back into with Brooke, and man, there was so much fun to do. That's like The Magician's Nephew. It's like a prelude that if you want to go see how we got into the love of God. But you're right. This book, to me, my favorite review of this book was I was at a church, and one of the women, a lady came up, she said, I was reading this book, and it thanked me for it and was really gracious about how it had impacted her. But my favorite review is, she said, I got halfway through it and I got so angry, I whipped it across the room. I threw it across the room. And I'm standing there and I'm listening to her. I'm waiting, like, okay. And then she said, and then I went and picked it back up. And I'm like, that's a beautiful endorsement. If you're trying to help someone navigate into the perfection of his love, and maybe you've got ideas about the love of God that are a little bit uncomfortable and maybe better than folks have been thinking. Prone to Love is 2/3 who the Father is as Jesus reveals. That's the first 2/3. The final third is how he actually sees us. And I agree with you. This is the book you give to that charismatic or Pentecostal evangelical who's knows Jesus' perfect theology, is perfectly comfortable with that phrase, but actually hasn't investigated it, started to take that thought and discover it and what it could truly mean. And so, yeah, this was, and we're going to get to the cover, but this was all the conversations I have on this podcast. They're birthed out of this. This was my discovery of union, even when I didn't have all of the language yet, the Christological lens, the Christocentric hermeneutic. Like, I didn't have some of that language yet. I didn't realize that I was actually tracking down the roads of the early church fathers, because I didn't have that yet. I just knew that God was love. He looked like Jesus. He was better than the last best thought I had about him. And today I would become more sure in his love than I was yesterday. And I had an encounter on the backside of two years. I've told some of those stories. We'll probably dive into that. And so this book for me is a foundational book upon which probably everything gets written. And it would be the one that I would send people to if they're at the beginning of a journey. So I love that insight, bro. I feel the same way.
Yeah. And it feels like it's not even just somewhere that somebody started on the journey. It is foundational to understand the Father's love. And I think that kind of leads me into a first question, because I tell you, the first thing that struck me now, knowing more of your story and everything, and reading all three books and going back and revisiting, is that your dad actually wrote the foreword. He wrote that. And I think that is the first thing that struck me, is that probably having a father and even a grandfather, you tell stories about your grandfather and that in the book as well, but having them support you made you feel safe enough to go on a journey like this. If you're coming out of the religious background, it feels like having a father the way you did probably made it feel much more comfortable and safe to deconstruct, if we're using that language, and go down that journey. But that's not everybody's story that has those fathers and mothers. Do you see a practical way that we that have come out on the other side of that can be those spiritual fathers and mothers to people that are deconstructing to, or how do we create a safe environment? And I think that is part of what the Facebook group is, but curious if you have thoughts on if there's practical ways that we can cultivate that.
Yeah. Well, this book was a discovery of the Father as Jesus revealed him. And, up to about 35, I had beautiful encounters with the love of God, and with Jesus and Father and Holy Spirit. I always saw the Trinity, but I had, like many in the evangelical church, separation on my lens. I had a perspective of what took place at the cross as a father looking away. In fact, to me, that's probably the pivotal turning point in the book, is as we revisit the cross and discover God was in Christ reconciling the world, we discover a Father who doesn't turn away. In my day of trouble, you did not turn your face from me. And we break down Psalm 22. But I did have a good father and a good mom. And so in that sense, I had the advantage of what my dad, they weren't perfect. And my dad had his own insecurities. He was chasing down the call of God. And I know I scared him in my early 30s and probably before that, as we, radically did some things and jumped out of some, had some radical acts of faith and navigated our own Mount Abraham and Isaac type scenarios where God would invite us into the heart of our delusions so we could be set free. My dad had to watch us do that, and yet he was always there for me, and I talk about him a lot in this book. He was always cheering me on, and so I did have a good model for a father. That said, if you have separation on your God lens, if you have a father who looks away at the cross, if that's your understanding, my whole life up to 35, I was an insecure and desperate man looking for the next spiritual father, chasing down someone who would see me and recognize me and call me into my identity. So even with the understanding of a good father and a good relationship with my dad, I lived in that orphan-like mentality, man. That desperation was the high watermark of spiritual. So I had all of those insecurities, chasing the conferences and trying to figure out how to get the kingdom of heaven to be within reach. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
All of that was there, a part of the journey for sure. I mean, I've told this story so many times, but let me just, because this is the book where I found myself 2 years feeling the absence of God. And on the back side of that, having an encounter where, again, he shows up, and I don't know how much you want to get into it or break it down, but
sure.
The first thing he addressed when he showed up was my understanding of who he was as a father. That first interaction, he asked me, am I a good father? To which you, of course, respond yes. And then he proceeded to say, well, then if there's desperation in our relationship, which there was, then it's not on my end. He was saying to me, if there's desperation in our relationship, if there's separation in our relationship, it's not on my end. It's on your lens. And so really what that was the precursor of this book. It was the discovery of the Father as Jesus revealed him, and the reality there is no separation in the nature of God and the nature of the Trinity. And then really stubbornly leaning into that with all of my strength and with all of his grace, with all of to be able to discover who my Father really is as Jesus revealed him. So that's a lot of navigating. But yeah, I do think, and I'll say this and I'll end it here. I think we all have a sense of what a good father should be.
Yeah.
I think everyone innately understands what love could and should be. And yeah, I did have the advantage of having it modeled out for me. And that did make it safer for me to be able to risk in ways that would be harder for others to risk, I imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like, if I could distill that down, it's if
I
you
touched
are
a bunch of stuff there. Go ahead.
Yeah. If you're struggling because you don't have that kind father or mother that makes you feel safe, then there's actually a spot to lean in to your heavenly Father. And it's not ethereal, it's union. And it's not this pie in the sky. I hope that I can have this communion. It's actually union, that the Father's actually the one that gives you the safety to go down that journey.
I believe that, and I've heard enough folks over the years that there is an encounter with the Father available for folks in this book. This book is titled Prone to Love, but you only discover you're prone to love as you discover we love because he first loved. And so the invitation of this book, everything about this book was really the first 2/3, and then it carries over, is us revisiting our God lens through Jesus and discovering a father who doesn't look away, a father who's trustworthy, a father who doesn't oscillate. All the stories in this book are invitations to revisit our lens of separation, which I didn't even have that language. I wouldn't have used separation in this book. And I mean, I use the word union, but I have a whole lot more understanding of union now. I just know that love doesn't turn away. That love, if God is good, as Jesus revealed, and God is love, then there is no shadow of turning in him. And so I was chasing that down. I was chasing the perfection of his love now. And I believe that it's a good place for folks who maybe are wrestling with who the Father is, maybe didn't have good parents. I believe that there's a whole lot of encounter and discovery of our Father's affection here. God is love. His love is always good, as Jesus reveals. And we exist to grow sure today than we were yesterday, and sure tomorrow than we are today. And on August 15 through 17, we get to grow sure together. Guys, the Rethinking God with Tacos conference is quickly approaching. We're excited about all the ways in which we're going to connect to the heart of the Trinity and to each other. We're going to break bread together, or tacos, of course. I have great expectation for God encounters, people encounters, love encounters. Baxter Kruger will be there. Dove Alexander, Felicia Morell, Brooke Waters, Derek Turner, and myself will be hosting. I'll be speaking. We've got lots of friends coming, and we still have some spots available. So August 15 through 17, you can learn more about the conference or buy the tickets and come join us at afamilystory.org. Afamilystory.org. Really excited about this, our first conference, and I can't wait to see you there.
It's almost like in Prone to Love, it was more of a relational way of trying to tear down the lie of penal substitutionary atonement. It's like you can go read a theology book on deconstructing penal substitutionary atonement, which is great. I find a lot of value in those. Or you can read a relational book on deconstructing it, which I think both are valuable. One gives you the facts and the info and the Greek and the Hebrew and everything you need to know. And then this one just allows it to skip the mind and just go right to the heart. Which I really appreciate with the book, and I think that's to me, every deconstructionist almost seems to start at going after PSA. So even if you didn't know where you were going to end up, but you read Prone to Love, it's easy to see where you were going to end up in your journey. You mentioned about that season of God, kind of not speaking. You talk about it in the book about God not speaking. You just kind of briefly hit on it there. Do you feel like you have any different perspective, or would you describe it the same way now, several years later, or really almost a decade later? Was God not speaking? Was it just your lens that couldn't hear him speaking, or would you describe that season in a different light now?
Yeah. So I'll tell the story. If you listen to this podcast, you'll hear bits and pieces, and occasionally I tell it in its long form. So I'll give a little bit more here. And pieces that I haven't shared in light of what you asked. And it was 15 years ago when we came out of that at 35. So I'm 50. I know I look like 40, but
yeah, you do. You look 41.
Like 41. Thanks, bro. You're one of my yes and guys. I like that. That's what we do, right? We do.
That's right.
Anyway, the short of it. We were in a season, and I actually share how we got there in the conversation I had with Brooke, which was fun to revisit. But we were in a season where we were thriving in business. There was so much life. I was having encounters with God, those type of charismatic Pentecostal encounters, just feeling his presence from the top of lots of the prophetic, passionately chasing down what the kingdom looks like here, thankful for Bill and Bethel and all of that. And I'm out for a run one day. I hear God, and the best way I can articulate it is he said, I'm going into hiding and I'm removing all your friends. And that's that's the best way, even in the moment, that I could, the feeling I got. It was a sense of, it wasn't dread, but I felt a sense of seriousness. And at first I didn't, it was really uncomfortable, but I knew enough about him. I knew enough about his goodness. I was still wrestling what was being placed upon me theologically. I hadn't figured out, there was the cross yet, but I knew he wouldn't leave or forsake me. I knew that. And I think the nature of God and the nature of testing is he actually doesn't invite you into a test until you're ready. A good teacher doesn't invite you into a test until you're actually ready to pass it. And that the test is always an invitation to a greater revelation of who he is, so that you can get your fractures off your God lens. That's the nature of testing. The way a good father, he's inviting you into a deeper intimacy.
Yeah.
And if you know that, then you embrace the test. And I had an indwelling knowledge of that piece of, and so I'm going into hiding. I'm removing all your friends. I've told this part a lot for the next 2 years. It felt like, and I do explain it in hindsight because I couldn't explain it then. It did feel like God left. It felt like, and then in hindsight, it felt like, okay, maybe he didn't leave, but he was in the next room and there was a thick door between us and he was speaking Cantonese. I don't speak Cantonese, and he's speaking it in a tone I'm unfamiliar with. Everything I knew about relating and connecting with God was upside down. And it felt like he disappeared. I appreciate the language hiding, because he hides so that we can discover. I love Bill Johnson's take on hiding. When you do an Easter egg hunt, if the 2-year-old is looking, you put it right in front of them.
Yeah.
In the grass, so they can find it, because there's something about the discovery, and you celebrate the discovery. But if the 15-year-old's looking, it's up in a tree behind, a nest, because there's still a hunt. There's something beautiful. And so that word hidden in a relational context is a beautiful thing. And he did go into hiding. And for 2 years, it was like how I described. I've shared the story where I've heard the phrase, a relationship with a son isn't desperate, or a relationship with a son is always desperate, for the father's dysfunctional. I'd heard that preached by someone, and it was Graham Cook's words. That was burning in me 2 years in, and 2 weeks after that, on a run, his presence, like a faucet, turns on, and I have a profound, beautiful experience. I've shared this often. In that conversation, he asks me if he's a good father. I say yes. He says, well, then if there's desperation in a relationship, it's not on my end. I pray a union prayer. I will no longer interact with you based on my needs, which was my understanding of separation and lack, or distance or delay. My perspective from this day forward, I'm going to endeavor to perceive from union. I'm going to interact with you based on your love, which is a measureless revelation that is the answer to every question that aches in the heart of humanity. I refer to that as my second salvation. Now, I can tell you, to answer your question, in the middle of that season, we lost our company, the one that he gave us, the one that I told the story about how we miraculously got into in the last in the last book with Brooke. We lost our company. I remember I'm a year into his silence, and I'm out for a run. And once upon a time, I would have gotten his instruction on everything I was doing. And I had gotten into this company through radical believing and trust and faith. And again, you can hear that story in the other podcast. And so now he's nowhere to be heard, nowhere to be seen. I'm out for a run. We've been putting fires out. We used to refer to that company as we lost it, like It's a Wonderful Life. If you remember that movie, there's a run on the bank, and Bailey goes into the bank, and at the very end, he takes his honeymoon money to settle all the issues, and they close the bank at 5:00, and he has $5 left. Every week, my dad and I would call each other. We were in partnership, and we'd be like, "We made it another week. We got $5 in the bank." That was a season over and over and over. Waking up to bill collectors and lawyers, and it was around 2008. We had a construction-based company, and obviously the whole market collapsed. And long story short, a year into that, we have an offer for pennies on the dollar. Had we sold it a couple of years earlier, I might have a lake house, but here we are now, pennies on the dollar. I can't sense him. I can't hear him. I can't feel him. I don't know where he is. I can't get his direction. And I'm out for a run, and I have a memory. I'm anxious because I don't know what to do. Do I take this offer? It would mean that I'd completely step away. It might save my dad, but it wasn't going to. The rest of us were just walking away with major amounts of debt. And I'm out for a run. I'm anxious. I can't hear God. And I have an image flash into my hand of an open hand. And the reason that's significant is years earlier when he gave me the company, he instructed me, I want you to steward this with an open hand. And when he instructed me years earlier, 5 years earlier, I was like, well, yeah, of course, it's your company. It wasn't rocket science. And of all the things he was saying, it was nothing. But now I can't see him. I can't hear him. I'm a year in. I'm out for a run, anxiety. I have an image of an open hand flash into my head, and peace comes over me. I didn't know. I said, God, I don't know if that's you or not, but I feel peace. And so I stepped away. I look back now and I go, of course that was him. Yeah. And I'll tell you one more story. We were driving down, and this one's in the book. We were driving down, my daughter and I were driving down to, she called it City Town, which is Charlotte. She was a handful of years old, just learning how to talk. Her brothers and sisters were homeschooled, and they were learning their shapes. And so they were pointing out all the stop signs, but they weren't calling them stop signs. They were calling them octagons. And Eva was with me on our way to City Town, and I was crying out to God in the middle of, I can't sense you. I can't hear you. We're losing our company. Everything is going, where are you? I'm begging him to show up. And every time I beg him to show up, she would interrupt with, Akaton, Daddy, Akaton, Daddy. And I would stop my desperate plea to God to go, oh yeah, Akaton, honey, that's an octagon. That's a stop sign. And then back to my wailing, and we did my errands, and then we went to Fat Burrito, had ourselves a quesadilla and a taco, because that's what you do. And she's talking about, what is this, Fat Burrito, and all the different ways that your little ones talk to you that only you understand.
Yeah.
Get back in the car, drive home. God, where are you? Octagon, Daddy. God, where are you? Octagon. Yeah, honey, that's an octagon. That's a stop sign. And all of a sudden I have this revelation, this thought. Again, this is God, but I couldn't have said it was him. I had this thought. I thought, you know what? I know her language intimately. I love her to her bones, but it would be a poor father if I also wasn't teaching her the proper language, my language, what this is actually called. It wouldn't serve her. Yeah. And I had this thought. I thought, God, if you're teaching me a new language, then let's do this thing, like, for goodness sake. Yeah. And so in hindsight, I can look back in those moments and realize, yeah, that's exactly what was happening. He was inviting me he was reintroducing me to my native tongue. Yeah. And we were learning a new language. He doesn't leave or forsake you. He hides so that you can discover him in a greater, deeper intimacy. So that's a long way to take through that story, but those are some new thoughts and stories around that whole season of then the explosion of union on the other side, and then the chasing down the understanding. Baxter the other day was telling me, Jason, your journey was one where you had all the experiences, but you were chasing down the understanding. Where for him, he had some experiences, but because he grew up in kind of almost a cessationist type of perspective, he had to go back to realize that those were encounters. And so he actually, as you said, went and got the theology, and then realized, started to put those pieces together. So we got there different ways, but I went hunting. That's when I stopped reading the Old Testament. I only read the Gospels because I knew I needed a new clarity on my God lens. Jesus had to be actual perfect theology. I did not know at the time that I was actually practicing what early church fathers would highlight as a Christocentric lens or Christocentric lens, high Christology, however you want to look at it. I didn't have that language. I didn't know that yet. I just knew that I would not participate with any love that forced me to do mental gymnastics around the nature of the word good.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is what God has to say about himself, and I won't be moved from left to right. He does not oscillate. Anyway, man, I just went on a preach. That's a long
No,
version
that's
of what
great.
was going on there.
It's almost like I hear two things. One, it's almost like God accommodated where you were at until he realized there was enough maturity there that he no longer needed to stoop and accommodate your broken lens of who he is.
Yeah.
And instead, he hid so that you could put on new glasses. I'm curious, it's just a follow up. Do you feel like the 2 years was him, or was it, could you have gotten there quicker if you would have known the right question to ask of, are you trying to teach me a new language? Then let's do this. Like, do you feel like that the journey took that long on his side or your side?
I mean, he literally said it to me. If there's desperation in our relationship, it's not on my end.
Yeah. I only say that
but I think, you know what that does, and you know it. Go ahead.
No, I just said it because I know that there's some people that are probably in that place where they're feeling that disconnect, and they can hear that story and be like, 2 years, like, I'm 6 months in. You may have another 18 months of hell. Like, so that's why I'm asking. It may be that they do, but so that's why I was just curious if you would say that, like you said, it was, could you have gotten there quicker?
Yeah. And you know your story. I mean, we all have stories like that. And I think 2 years was my journey in the particular nature of, could it have been quicker? Sure, but it wasn't. So no.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's not a magic number. I think, it's the invitation. I do think maybe it helps to be able to realize, okay, this is a journey. I'll say this, what it does do, having navigated for 2 years is it provides grace to me. And we talk about this all the time. Everybody's doing the best they can is a phrase that my wife first said and Brene Brown made famous. I always got to make sure we get because she's been saying that for a long time, but there's a grace for everybody's journey. You know what I'm saying? So that when I meet with someone, I can appreciate that wherever they are on the Emmaus Road, I look at that Emmaus Road, which we're going to get to later on, and leaving and finding Jesus and maybe dive into in depth. But it's just the Emmaus Road journey where he hides beside you to reveal himself to you. And it's a necessity that he hides himself because your preconceived ideas otherwise will get in your way and cut you off from meeting who he truly is or discovering the resurrected Christ. These guys literally said on the Emmaus Road, we had thought he was the one. Well, he was the one, just not in the way they had thought. And I think all of us are on that journey. And it's why I have so much grace for deconstructing, even though that language can be a little clunky. I think there's better ways to navigate it. I'm like, we're all stepping away from these fractured ideas we have about God. First and foremost, penal substitutionary atonement. I think that lie of separation and then retribution and how it messes up your understanding of justice and forces you to do mental gymnastics around what good means. I think we're all on that journey, and he's walking beside us. And so, in hindsight, it was 2 years, but I would do it again for the liberty I discovered I'd do 4 years. And it's not about that. It's not about time. It's about, I discovered union. I discovered the gospel. I still pray prayers where there are places in my life where I'm like, Father, I'm willing to go up the mountain with my Isaac. If I've got an Isaac right now, that like an idea about you that requires child sacrifice, if there's some fracture on my lens that isn't true about who you are, let's go up the mountain. Let's get this. Like, I'd rather live on the other side. I want to live on the other side of this union, this discovery of union, than in this place where I'm constantly wrestling desperation and insecurity, which was everything about my life up to 35 years old. And, the thing he said on that road was desperation is an illegal activity, and insecurity is an illegal activity for you to participate in as a son. Well, great. Let's go work out what does that mean? Because you only discover that when you realize there's no shadow of turning in him.
Yeah.
And so that's what we went to go get. Okay, it's illegal to feel desperation. Well, he's not saying it's illegal to feel it, but he's saying everything I have is yours. So it's an illusion. It's a delusion. Your desperation isn't real because everything I have is yours. It's a finished work. So let's go. That's what we began to go unpack over these last 15 years. Here will I sing. Oh, oh, oh. Hey guys, interrupting for a second. Glad you're here. So thankful for this podcast. Thankful to get to do this with friends. Thankful for Derek and all of those who've navigated it with us. Listen, this podcast is done under our nonprofit, A Family Story. 12 years ago, I had a vision and I wrote it down. I'm going to read it to you. Family Story is a relational community of creatives, family and friends. I see all of us as creatives. We do life together. We envision and express God's love through our gifting and grace. We are worshipers, dreamers, storytellers, and preachers, a family of dads and moms, brothers and sisters, daughters and sons, united by a passion to know and reveal God's perfect love. I feel like I'm seeing the fulfillment of some of that vision 12 years ago. The mandate on A Family Story was to create media content catalytic for an encounter with the love of God. afamilystory.org is our website. I encourage you to go there. There's a whole lot of media content there. There's books and articles. There's films, some music, and this podcast. That's the home of Rethinking God with Tacos, which is pretty dang cool. It's been life-giving, as I said, the community around it, the community of creatives, of family and friends that's growing. It's blown me away. And so I'm thankful. I'm thankful for all the relationships, connections, and I'm thankful for all those who've given. Rethinking God with Tacos is listener-supported. If you'd like to support us, you can go to afamilystory.org. Again, we're a nonprofit. And I would encourage you to join us on our Facebook group. Follow us on Instagram, all the socials. If you're curious how to find me on the socials, it's at Jason Clark is. Otherwise, like, share, write a review on iTunes or Spotify. Tell your mom. We really are loving doing this, and I'm so thankful for everyone here. All right, it's time to get back to the podcast.
Yeah, it's almost like no matter what story you're listening to or what journey, it really does all go back to we all kind of seem like we're going to have that dark night of the soul, as St. John of the Cross wrote, 1,000 years ago about the dark night of the soul. But, something you said in that sparked kind of going towards the end of the book, and then we can come back to the middle too. But, you talk about the book about the wrong question, about the man born blind. Like, the disciples are asking these questions, the wrong question, but something you were talking about, like even if you have to take your Isaac up, this view of God, this fractured lens. One thing that, as I was rereading that chapter, made me think is how do we keep our focus off of that sin and counting the wrong questions? How do we keep it off of behavior and on to living? Or in other words, how do we change our biasness? Because we all have it. How do we change our biasness about ourselves and God to be his biases? Because that's what I want. I want his bias for my neighbor, for my enemy, for myself, for him, like specifically my enemy, because that's the harder one. But like, how do we bridge that gap to where our biases become his biases? Like, what have you found that's helped you in those seasons to make that? I know we could all distill it down to union, but what are some of those things that have helped you get union in those different fractures of your heart?
Yeah, dude. There's a C.S. Lewis quote, "What shall botch?" But he basically something to the extent of a lot of our questions of God or our perspectives of him being silent isn't that he's doesn't care or he's being silent. It's that we're asking impossible questions like how many reds are in a mile.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's not that God's not answering our question. It's that we need a better question. And so the journey is into the discovery of a better question. I've talked about this a lot, so I'll just say it briefly. After that encounter after those two years, and then that shifting moment for me, I had a prayer that I prayed before I get out of bed, because we were still in the middle of all kinds of financial stuff, figuring out the after effects of everything that had happened. The prayer was, Father, show me who you are, and I'm not going to be moved from it until I get Jesus's perspective. until I come into agreement with how Jesus has revealed you. Show me how you see me. There's a big deal. A part of Prone to Love, the point, that last third of this book, is I had been raised to believe I was desperately wicked. Which is one more way to live in the context of separation, fractured. You don't even have access to your own emotions and feelings. And you actually have to live in some fractured, broken space because you can't even trust your proclivities, because if you're left alone, you would be depraved. Well, no, we're made in the image of likeness of God. We are made prone to love, and so, Father, show me how you see me, and I repent. Part of what took place on that in that encounter. The first part was he asked me about who the Father was, but there's another part of that story, or before he asks me who the Father was, where he tells me and corrects me and tells me I need to come into agreement with how he sees me. And I've told that story enough times and it's in the book. But I think repenting regarding how he sees you, coming into agreement with the finished work of the cross, that we are the righteousness of Christ, that we're dead to sin, alive to Christ, that grace isn't a balancing act. Grace is the empowering of our identity in Christ. It is living from this place of finished work, living restored to our original design. And so we spend a lot of time rediscovering who we were originally designed to be and what Jesus restored to us. So, Father, show me who you are. Father, show me how you see me. And then from there, Father, show me how to take on the day, how I see this person. Show me how you see this person. Come into agreement with that. I'm going to see this person the way you see this person. I'm going to see this circumstance the way. And I would say the mile marker, the thing that would let you know that you're outside of that, anxiety, desperation, fear, insecurity, those things are all the feelings. But I think if you're looking for a practical tool, God was in Christ reconciling the world, not counting our sins against us. When we get in trouble is when we play the counting game. When we start getting into the knowledge of good and evil, and we start doing that game of dualism where we're counting, whether it's counting what's happening in our lives, we're focused on because the moment you start counting, your destination is lack. Yeah. It's the rich young ruler. You find yourself on the road of lack. You're playing the dualistic knowledge of good and evil. You're participating in the law. If you're participating in the law, you will eventually say, I'm doing them all. What am I still lacking? That was the conclusion the rich young ruler came to: lack. And lack is connected. It's only there when you step out of the tree of life, that measureless love, that place of everything I have is yours. And so to me, the moment you start counting, whether you're counting sins or you're counting your lack, is where you've stepped off the road that is, or you've picked the wrong cross up. Yeah. You're on the wrong side of the cross. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I know. I love those questions. Yeah. I know whenever my wife and I, we teach a lot of like hearing God classes and things like that, and we're trying to help them understand God as a good father. Two of the questions we always have them ask is, one, what is your favorite, like asking God, what is your favorite personality trait that you've given me? And then what is one of your favorite memories with me? And why? And it's fascinating what people hear and then trying to teach them, like, if you hear anything that doesn't sound like the fruit of the Spirit, it can't be God. So if it doesn't in some way bring love, peace, joy, peace, patience, gentleness, kindness, if it doesn't have one of those in it, it's not God. You can completely throw it away. And those are just to throw into what you said, just some tools to help change that biasness. Because I find that even things like how did you see that scenario? Like, because I feel like I failed, or I feel like that was a moment of brokenness. And it's like to hear it from his perspective can even rewire how you go back and even look at that memory. Like I've got so many painful memories now that I can look back on, and I just see life in them, and I see joy, and I look back and they're no longer painful. They were blessings, and I can actually, not Christianese like language blessings, like I can actually look back to that painful memory and feel no pain. And it just feel like purposeful or hopeful. So, a couple more things I definitely want to make sure we hit too. But one, I got to talk about your grandma, because number one, that's the title of the book. It's from that's the pinnacle story of the book to get to the title. And I told you before, like I think about your grandma a lot, maybe more than you. It's probably a little weird, but I think about that. It's because that story, like, it's just because I can just picture. I don't no clue what she looks like, no clue what she sounds like, but in my head I can see her and I can hear her in that story where she, basically just tells your brother or cousin that singing that song, Prone to Wander. It's like, I'm not prone to wander. I love him. Something else that you said in the book that you're, I think, quoting her that I want to get to and to get your thoughts on is that it's impossible to take advantage of love. Do you remember that part of the book where it's talking about other people taking advantage? And I would be curious to hear how you hold language like that in tension with having boundaries, and how do we differentiate love and enablement? And sometimes they can look very similar, but you can also go to the other side and say love is sometimes cutting people off and not letting them take advantage of you. But how would you navigate language like it's impossible to take advantage of love when you do have people like Brene Brown and people that are talking about healthy boundaries and setting up boundaries and things like that? Like, how would you navigate that and suggest others navigate that? Because I know where I land on that. It is probably the unpopular side, but I would just be curious to know how you navigate that.
I want to hear how you navigate it, bro. You're good at this this podcast thing, man. You should do this.
Oh yeah,
more often. My grandmother, I'll say,
because I just think it's. I love your grandma. I never met her, don't know her, but I just love that story. Just she's forever endeared to my heart.
Grandma Eva, my youngest, is named after her, and she shows up in a few other books too. Lived to be 100. Elmer was her husband. He was 98 when he passed, and both of them saints. And when she passed, you don't realize they would give, even if it was $5 a month to different missionaries. But we had people from all over the world that came, and so it's a rich inheritance there for sure. And she's in the service in her 70s. Jonathan, she went to church, as many times as they had a service. And Jonathan, my cousin, was with her, and that part came up. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. And I'd not heard the story. I was halfway through writing the book, didn't have a title yet, and heard this story, prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. She got stubborn, and Jonathan was concerned for her health. He thought, something's wrong with Grandma. So he leaned over, he said, Grandma, what's wrong? And she said, I'm not prone to wander, Jonathan. I love him. And when I heard that, I get chills thinking about it now, because Grandma in her 70s came into a revelation of union, a perspective of a finished work in her 70s that my folks got in their 50s and I got in my 30s, and my kids get to participate in their formative years. And the idea that my feelings, we've been the church has almost embraced that prone. When I said prone to love and I cut that out 15 years ago, I got that was the early, there were people wanted to call me a heretic for that. We somehow thought it was more authentic to languish in our proclivity to wander, or our ability to do it, as though that was somehow honest or integrous. I'm like, well, the only thing integrous about that is if you're transformed and you stop doing it.
Yeah.
So for me, our feelings don't determine who we are. Jesus determines who we are, and he tore the veil. He invited us into this place of union where we can be again restored to our original design. We're prone to love. So huge, and not taking advantage of love. On top of that, my grandma and grandfather, you might have said they were taken advantage of, but you couldn't take advantage of them. Grandma had a cookie jar in her kitchen, and my dad talked about how the neighbor kids would just come into the house and walk into the house and take the cookies and walk out. They knew that they could walk into my grandma's house all the way through till her late 90s. kids would just walk into her house from the neighborhood, take the cookies and walk out. And you're like, well, that almost feels like you could take advantage of grandma, but you couldn't because you can't take advantage of love. I know what you're saying. I want to hear your thoughts. Here's my thoughts on boundaries and in this context. Paul Young said on the podcast years ago, he put it into words what I was already doing and I already knew, but he gave me a sentence for it. He said, trust is my through line. And I remember when I was writing God is Not in Control, a friend of mine, Mark Appleyard, he said, Jason, he'd already read Prone to Love, and he was reading that for me and giving me his 2 cents. And he said, you know that everything you do is about trust. And when he said that, I went, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. And so when Paul gave language to it, I went, oh, yeah, trust is my through line. And trust is an expression of love. Everything has its foundation in love. But trust is one of the things here on earth that is a commodity. It's earned and can be lost in a moment. It's earned through those who will lay their lives down, other-centered, self-giving, greater love over time. So it's learned through those who will lay their lives down over time. And trust is earned and it can be lost in a moment. And so for me, boundaries aren't some systematic structure that you need to learn because then it gets convoluted. Did this person do that or did they do that? No, boundaries are, have you earned my trust yet? I can love you all day long. I can lay my life down for you. And I can see you the way the Father sees you. But if you've broken my trust, and at that point, it's not going to change my love for you, but it will change your access to the deeper parts of me. It's going to change how I might give you access to those most precious to me. If that makes sense. And so trust then becomes a conversation. I think that most of the church has a fractured understanding of trust, which would make sense because if you have a father who looks away, then you have a fractured ability to even understand how trust works. And so next thing you know, you're conflating honor with trust. We have a whole bunch of leaders who will get up on a pulpit and conflate honor with trust. I was on staff at a church where at one point I learned what you call spear dodging honor, meaning the fellow that I was serving wasn't trustworthy. And I realized that David didn't have to trust Saul to honor him and to love him. But he also better not take his eyes off him. Yeah. Had he taken his eyes off him, he'd have been skewered. So I learned that I can honor you and I can love you, but you have to earn my trust. And so I got to keep if I take my eyes off you, I'm going to get skewered. Because and the sad thing is we've conflated honor and trust as the same thing, and so folks think, I've got to honor you. Honor is just I see you made in the image and likeness of God. I love you for who you are. But trust is connected to your character, your integrity, and your actions, and how we'll navigate, and how closely I have to keep an eye on you.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense. I would love to hear your thoughts.
No, I think that's great. I'll frame it. I won't say the hot button topic we were talking about on the phone a couple of years ago. And you basically said, yes, if I was to say in an ideal world that this is truth, but we don't live in an ideal world, so I'll live where we don't live in an ideal world. I don't know if you remember that conversation, but I think that
vaguely, yeah.
In an ideal world, we would all look like Jesus, where we lay down our life for even the ones that will skewer us. But because we don't live in an ideal world, I'm okay with people putting up boundaries if it keeps them safe, like the trust thing. But when it comes to love, I think you should give out of the measure that you've been given, or that there's grace for you to give in this season. Yeah. And so that's how I think I probably definitely side more on the way that Jesus would love his enemies, would even allow himself to be skewered. But there was grace for him to do that. Right. And if there's not grace for me to do that in this season, it doesn't mean that I won't be called to do that in another. Yeah. So I think it's where's their grace at today? And is there grace today to
Yeah.
to give them access to the cookie jar. And if there is, then I won't stand in the way. But if there's not grace, then I'll lock the door today.
Yes.
I think that's the safest way I can answer that without getting myself in trouble.
But I love it. We've been having these conversations on the podcast. We even had Jared Nash on, and you start talking about pacifism and the Christian pacifism and what that looks like. And without getting too far down that rabbit hole, I think grace is a really, really good way to do it, because Jesus laid his life down for us. So there's also that's the model. But we live in a broken and fractured place. And the conversation that we started to tease a couple of podcasts back was when Jesus told the disciples, "Dark days are coming. You're going to need a cloak and a sword." I'm starting to process through that we have the capacity. What if the invitation is you have the capacity to hold the sword and the self-control not to use it?
Yeah.
What if there's an invitation in this broken world that we live in that looks like if Jesus has a whip in his hand and he's driving people out of the temple, he's doing it in the spirit of cruciform love. Yeah. We talk about this all the time. He's never, not once, he's never, that seems like a double negative. Not once is he outside of cruciform love. When he flips the table, he's on both sides of the table, and so this subject can get complicated in the fractured world we live in. But I had a guy call me years ago and ask me if he was stressed out over the fact that he wasn't sure if he'd be willing to die for Jesus, assuming that I had already settled that in my heart. And he said, well, obviously you'd be willing to die for him. And I was on my back deck in my sweatpants and like, what I sleep in. And I was like, bro, I'm in the backyard drinking a coffee in my PJs. Like, no. And he was like, what? I'm like, well, two things. First of all, Jesus didn't ask me to die for him. He died for me. He asked me to live. Jesus didn't ask me to die for him. He did invite me to lay my life down for you. Yeah. So let's get this right. He actually has never asked us to die for him. He's asked us to partner with him in laying our lives down for one another. Yeah. That's the problem. We have a penal substitutionary atonement even on that thought, like somehow he wants us to die for him. No, he invited us to live in the resurrected life, laying our lives down for one another. Second, I'm not in a situation where I have to die right now. I'm on my back deck with my coffee. I'd like to think there'll be grace for me if I'm in that situation, which is directly speaking to what you're talking about, that there's grace in the moment and wisdom in the moment to understand how to navigate. But that's a deep well. Yeah. And we get a little further along in leaving and finding Jesus.
Yeah. Thinking of just even talking about that grace, I know there was a question from David that he asked, just wanted to get your thoughts on like grace is brave to be brave. And that was a specific question he had from Prone to Love, of just kind of what your thoughts are on grace. The question that Brooke sent, what's your thoughts on grace is brave to be brave. So take that wherever you want, if you understand.
I saw that. And I wondered, there's a couple places you can go, but this book focuses on the measureless nature of love. And so in the measureless nature of love, everything he has is ours. It's a finished work we're living from. I tell the story in this book about my daughter and I playing the I love you to the trees and back game, where I tell her I love her to the trees and back at night. And then she says, I love you to the trees and back to the sun, the moon, and the stars. I've told this story a lot. It's one of the stories from this book. Back and forth, we measure our love. Again, remember trying to play that measurement game, only to me give her a litany of my love and her get all clever and say daddy times two. She's 5 years old. Daddy times two takes the smallest multiplier she can think of to blow up my understanding of a measurement game around the love of God, meaning the moment you think you get your arms around how good he is and how measureless his love is, it's times two, daddy. And I think that if you have that understanding, then you step into grace being not this dualistic thing where we got to have justice or something on one side and grace on the other. If you've heard about that road, you got to somehow you're on this balancing act, which just means you're doing mental gymnastics around what good means again. So we're not doing that. Instead, grace is actually because people are worried in a sin counting world. If you have too much grace, then you're going to sin more, which, by the way, Paul's preaching at one point too in Romans, a law mindset. And he realizes, and this is how you know you're preaching grace well to a law mindset. If you preach grace well to a law mindset, you have to stop in the middle and go, does that mean that I should sin more to get more grace? He literally says that and says, no, you're not getting it. But he actually has to stop, because in a law mindset, you go, oh, okay, so if you give me more grace, it's just a bigger sin card. No. Grace is the empowering of righteousness. The reality is if you're walking in grace, you can't sin. It's not even we're not even in that paradigm. Sin isn't an option because you're in grace. If you're sinning, you're outside of grace, meaning you're just not participating, not outside of as separate, but you're not participating. You're not awakening in that moment to the grace of God. Grace is this ever expanding revelation of his and our righteousness. It's of the nature of a greater love. And so I think that is where you discover bravery, if you will, boldness, the miraculous, some of the stuff we were talking about before we hit record, that you and I kind of grew up in, that we want to see miracles and the kind of bravery that empowers you to get out of the boat and walk with Jesus on the water. Those types of things that fascinate me.
Yeah,
I don't know if I've touched on that subject, but I bet you got those too.
Well, David, you'll have to email us if we didn't, and we'll pin Jason down to answer it more directly. But I think that's a good segue, because it's definitely something I wanted to ask, because we come from both charismatic backgrounds. Actually, I grew up Baptist, and then I got baptized into charismania, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. But in that world, words of knowledge and the prophetic and hearing the prophetic or words of knowledge for other people. Or signs and wonders like healings and things like that. That's a big proponent in the charismatic world, and I don't feel like I see a lot of that being brought into on this other side. Like you just don't hear a lot about it, and maybe it's because the people that came out of that background now are trying to pull their focus off of that because it was in a measuring game. Which, on a side note, I got to tell you this: reading that story about you and your kid playing the measure game, I'm like, I'm going to do that with my daughter. Okay, so when my daughter was 3, I decided to institute it, and it did not work because my daughter, I said, like, I tried to do something that's like, I love you as long as or as tall as the tree, and she looked at me with this puzzled face, and she said, Dad, does God love people the most? And I said, yeah. She goes, okay, I love you as much as God. And I was like, okay, you just skipped right to the times 2 part. And so anytime I ever tried to play it, she's
but
like,
that means she got it right off the bat. She's like,
yeah, she skipped all of the measuring sides. She's like, what's the biggest it can be? That one? Okay, then and then I'll be like, okay, well, I love you times God and Holy Spirit. She goes, silly, they're the same person. And so it was just a side note. It's a funny story thinking about that. So, that's your journey with your daughter, and I can't make it my own, but we don't see that in like on the charismatic. And I know there's pockets, I know Dub with the School of the Kingdom, they have a lot. And, you just recently had Dr. Tony Robinson on, who's talking a lot about dreams and, I'm sure that maybe she didn't talk about it in the thing that she's getting into, even some dream interpretation with some of that. So I know there's pockets there, but like you always say on the podcast, I'm not sure if there's a question there, but it's like, how do we bring that in? Because I do think that is a pivotal point that I don't want to. And throwing out all of the bad water, that is a sacred baby to me that I don't want to throw out on this side. If anything, I want to live in a more true place of what that looks like. Because if we now understand the revelation of union, then theoretically it should be easier to access even the greater works that Jesus talked about. So take that wherever you want to go. But I'm just curious, like, how do we bring the good parts of the charismatic side, the words of knowledge, the prophecy, the healing, and bring it to this side?
I love that, and I love that interaction with your daughter. What I think is hilarious is that she because this is what they do, and I love it. It's the competition. It's right off the bat. So she cuts to the chase. She's like, "How do I
Yeah.
win? Like,
Yeah.
let's because that's the game we were playing." And it was obviously it happened naturally that we were playing the who loves each other more game, and it's such a fun game to play because everybody wins, and the discovery is the discovery is the same. It's this measureless, like, oh, God, oh, so yeah, man, I think that's awesome. And we were talking about this a little bit before. My background, I'm thankful for Bill Johnson and Bethel, and I think there's so much that he gave me Jesus' perfect theology, and God is good. So those were the two pillars that allowed for me to traverse some of the roads that I did, and of course, heaven, the kingdom is not just within reach; the kingdom is within you. And some of the language around the kingdom, and the fact that Jesus talked about the kingdom, and the fact that the kingdom is about family. Our ministry is called A Family Story, and it was a phrase that Bill gave years ago that I heard: "If it isn't family, it isn't kingdom." Well, that resonated with me in so many ways. Jesus came to show us the Father, what it looks like to live confident as His kid, and so all of that resonates. And then there's that piece that I think in so many ways I was attaching striving to. If you're living in the context still of separation, then the miracles, they become the focal point instead of the fruit. And so I think a lot of folks at Deconstructed probably have accidentally, or at this point aren't interested in reinvestigating that baby. But I feel like we're there. I feel like this discovery of union is so beautiful that somehow, this is what fascinates me. Somehow, the ease in which hearts and minds and bodies are made whole, right? Sozoed. Some of the things we learned, where your shadow heals, like where you're just walking along, and the oneness that you're walking in. It brings union and wholeness to the world around you and the culture around you. I think it's happening in individuals and in families, and I think we're going to begin to see it more. I love that we're leaning in. It is my background, but the shift for me has been, and I get passionate about it because it's an area of my life where I've not seen what I believe we've been invited to see, and can you hear all those bings? Sorry, I got like 9,000 texts.
Yeah. No, I don't hear. No, I don't hear them.
Okay, you're good. I'll keep going. I'm passionate about this particular subject, and the shift for me has been, and I talk about it occasionally here on the podcast. I grew up with this miraculous on earth as it is in heaven mindset, and took a little of that separation and striving into when Jesus is sleeping in the middle of a storm in a boat. My focal point until several years ago was that he could calm storms. It was the miraculous. And I could preach on it, and it's a good preach. Jesus could sleep because there was no storms in heaven. I learned that, and I think that's a good perspective and healthy. But I'm more fascinated by the idea that Jesus took a nap because he always did what he saw the Father doing. And in that moment, the Father was taking a nap. And that's the piece that surpasses understanding. That's the piece that I'm fascinated by, and I think is the awakening taking place. That's union presented in a way where the storm isn't even relevant to the reality of Jesus's moment, that he's in a moment where he's tired, he takes a nap. And the storm, of course, he calms it, and that's important. And that's the piece that we're leaning into. But he doesn't do it for, he does it from. It's the response of his union. It's what he says to his disciples when he comes down off the Mount of Transfiguration, And there's a young boy who's been throwing himself into the fire, and he's oppressed. And the father asks for healing, and the disciples at the bottom of the mountain had tried and failed. And so Jesus heals them, and then he kind of calls them out. How much longer must I be with you? Which wasn't a derogatory thing. He was looking at the fruit of separation and heartbroken over it. How much longer do you have to live in this fractured state? How much longer do you have to live in the finite impossibilities of this moment? And then he says the most crazy thing. He says, if you had the faith, because the disciples say, how did you do it, essentially? And he said, if you had the faith of a mustard seed, you could point to that mountain and say, move from here to there, and it would move. It would move into the ocean. And the question, the answer to their question had to have them measuring. How much faith do we need? He says, the faith of a mustard seed. So they ask how much. He gives them an answer. But the answer is an impossibility. What he's saying is not that this is about a measurement. What he's saying is this is about the nature of my intimacy. This is about union. Union is actually how we speak to the mountain. If you had access to the union that I have access to, then you could speak to a mountain, move from here to there, and it would be done. Because our nature is to measure again. So he gives us the smallest thing that they can think of to make it impossible, so that they realize we're not participating in measurements, because that's not possible. It didn't make any sense. How are we going to get from here to there with a mustard seed? Okay, so how much do I have then? Like, what's less than a mustard seed? That's the game we've been playing our whole lives, even around this issue here. And I believe we're in the process of discovering the nature of his intimacy. Jesus invites us into, if you had a revelation of who the Father is and who you truly are and your connection to him, you'd speak to mountains and they'd move. And it would be just nothing. And so, man, yeah, I get excited about it. I think there's folks that are coming alive. I think there's a hunger. I think there's a need. I still believe in all the stuff that Bill was sharing about a church that reveals on earth as it is in heaven. I think union is the invitation. And I've been on a preach long enough, I think. But.
No, that's really good. And you can cut this next part out if you want, but as you're even saying, I just felt Holy Spirit speak to my heart, and kind of having to hold it back emotions a little bit. But, it's almost like you ever hear the Lord speak, and it's like, it's something short, but it feels like it just unpacks and you could talk about it for an hour. But in essence, it's like we talk about shadows healing. And that's always something that I like, Lord, like, so be in me that my shadow would heal. And what I was just feeling like the Holy Spirit just whispering to me is that, we've so strived for our shadows to have a physical healing of someone. But I think what Holy Spirit's wanting us to get to is that the level of union and intimacy, that our shadow doesn't just affect a physical healing, but it can also affect an emotional healing and a spiritual healing. And it's almost like in our pursuit of signs, wonders, and miracles, we've went too short of the goal. Yes, getting them healed physically is amazing, but to leave them broken spiritually, emotionally, just allows them to live in brokenness longer than if they would have died of whatever the ailment was. And it's like, no, I think that's the goal, is that when we come into such a union and intimacy that our shadows bring about a spiritual, emotional, and physical transformation. So I know for me, it feels like, man, it's almost like I'm asking the wrong question about bringing signs and wonders back and thinking of a physical healing. And that's only 1/3 of the whole process.
Bro, I think that's powerful, because I think, even to piggyback on that, I think we learned a lot of some really important things, how God thinks about how the miraculous is meant to be for today. I think I don't downplay any of that major movement that really was taking place, that Bethel and Bill were forerunners in. But I do think, to add to what you were just saying, that if there's been a heaven to earth reality in the last 10 years, it'd be in this. It's around some of the things you're talking about. It's not just a physical. It is a getting our heads right and our hearts right and our emotions right and our coming into alignment with a holistic understanding of on earth as it is in heaven, on earth as it is in heaven. The kingdom is within us, not just out here and not just expressed in the physical, but is actually a holistic mind, heart, soul, mind, and strength. There's a reason it's in that order: heart, soul, mind, and strength. It's that Emmaus Road: heart, soul, they get in the house, our minds catch up. Now our strength to go take it back to Jerusalem and actually participate in the entirety of the revelation, the holistic reality of it, encapsulating every part of our being, heart, soul, mind, and strength. I think you're onto something. And I think it reminded me of years ago. I was out for a walk after I was at a conference, and it was lunchtime, and I went home back to the hotel. And instead of taking a nap, I went for a walk, and this resonates with me because I had my father ask me a question, and it was the kind of question that, he's just telling you something. He said, Jason, is it possible to live in such a way where you get to the end of your life and you step from this life into the next and you don't break pace, you don't break stride? I had a picture of, up till then, I had this thought that I'd only have a sliver of an inkling of what God was like here. And when I got to heaven, I'd finally figure it out. And what he was addressing was, there's an invitation for you to become so confident in my affection that you're not shocked by how heaven operates when you get there, because you've been operating in the context of heaven throughout your life. And I think that's where the holistic reality of healing is becoming available to us. And I think there's an awakening taking place where hearts, souls, minds, and our strength is beginning to participate in this union, this gospel good news. We're prone to love, brother.
Yeah, we are. It's like, man, we've been going for an hour and 10 minutes and some change. It's like, I didn't get to half of the stuff that we could have talked to in the book. So the only thing that I know that means is that people should just go get the book. And there is an Audible version. I don't know if you knew that or not, but there's an AI Audible version. So I don't know if you get credit for that if they buy it.
When you said it, I was like, I've never heard of it. When you said there was an Audible version, I was like, where?
Listen, I was trying to. It's on Audible.
On Audible?
Yeah, it is on Audible.
Well,
look at that on Audible right there.
This part out. It's on Audible.
It's on Audible, and it says it's AI generated.
I wonder. Do you pay for it?
Yeah.
Well, I wonder who gets that money. Anyway, I sold my birthright to sign with a publisher that I've yet not to made a penny on. In fact, I'm upside down $200 on this book.
Oh man! Well,
so
people should go get it.
Cut that out. I don't know, but that's news to me. What's that?
That's what people need to go get it so that they can, we can get you right side up.
Yeah, I probably need to cut this part out. It's on Audible. Well, that's news to me. And,
and I just looked it up. So is God is not in control.
How that? Well, God is not in control. I put on Audible.
Okay, yeah.
So I know it's on Audible.
Yeah, but yeah, prone to love.
Yeah. That one
by AI.
That one impacts. I wonder how that works and why I didn't know about it. But anyway, that's good. I like books on Audible.
Yeah, it says this title uses virtual voice narration. So there you go.
There you go.
But people should definitely get it. We didn't get to 10% of the book. That's all we got through in our topics.
10%.
We didn't even
talk about the oscillating God.
We didn't talk about Mexican hamburgers. That was one I definitely was planning on getting to. We didn't get to that. We didn't even get to how many times you've ran from the police. Which people just have to read the book to get an insight of how many times you've ran from the police. But
yes.
The one question that we didn't talk about that we do have to ask.
Okay.
What's your taco story?
Come on, man. I was going to say, I figured that's where you were going. Nice. Well, there's no taco stories in this book. There is a hamburguesa story. That's the one you're talking about, the Mexican hamburger. That's that time that I almost hit a 3-story pink Peeps bunny. But I don't know, man. Taco story. The most recent, I was just down Canados. I was in Greenville, South Carolina with my friend Matthew Hester this last weekend. And we went to a place called Canados. We got a chicken, like a jerk chicken, spicy. There was some sort of jalapeno rub on it. And then it came and it had a hard shell wrapped in a soft taco. And I got to be honest, man, unbelievable. So it's not an exciting taco story, but I've done 150 of these podcasts. So I'm running out of fresh taco story. I got to go with the most recent. I will say this. I was down there for 36 hours and I had tacos twice. And that's not a complaint. That's a brag because if there was ever anything that I did well, it was naming this podcast, Rethinking God, with tacos.
Yeah. That's a good way to end it then.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So now they just got to go.
How about you?
Book.
You got a taco story?
Oh, listen, I eat tacos at least once a week, and sometimes I drive 45 minutes just to go to a good taco place. So, but I'm a little bougie, and I only eat one kind of taco. I just get a taco with chorizo. I just want chorizo, cilantro, onion, squeeze some lime on it, and a good corn tortilla. But don't double wrap it. Don't give me the double wrap corn tortilla because you're not confident in your corn tortilla skills. I just want a single corn tortilla with chorizo, cilantro, and onion. So that's all. That's all I ever eat.
I love it. And I'm with you, but it was a nice surprise. I actually enjoyed the double wrap. I didn't expect it. And it was actually really, really good. But I'm with you, man. Simple. I made chorizo tacos the other day. And by the way, I owe your wife a whole lot of hellos and thank yous because she told I was on a candida diet, which is basically of the devil. And I made chorizo tacos. It was at the end of the diet. So people knowing the diet would say you shouldn't have chorizo, but I was at the end of the diet and felt like I could get away with, that's a bit of a fattier meat. So I had chorizo in the shells she told me about, which are almond flour. And I had them like you talked about, and it's legit, man. I was my saving grace at the end of that diet. Hey, I got to say this, folks, Bryant is incredible. He's been a friend. He's also a friend to the podcast in that he helps guide and steward as far as he's a strategist who thinks from a 30,000 foot level, understands how to do some of the systems, especially around this type of thing. So hugely involved behind the scenes in making sure that we're providing content and better looking podcasts and better sounding reels. He handles all of our reels, which you can find on Instagram. But dude, I'm so thankful for you. And I love doing this. We're going to do one more. I'm doing one more with Brooke on God. The next one's with you on God is Not in Control. That'll be fun. We'll just pick up where we left off.
Yeah, that's right.
And then one more with Brooke on Leaving and Finding. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And that'll be good. Yeah. As far as where you can find the book, afamilystory.org, you can buy it there, although it probably is easier on Amazon. And you can get all of the books there. And familystory.org is our website. I don't normally close these things, man. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're the guest. So you have to close it, So, but yeah, go get the book. You definitely, buy two so you can give it to someone else that is starting their journey or that you want to start their journey of rethinking God. And I can't wait for God's Not in Control. That's my favorite of the trilogy and of the four. So I can't wait to talk about that with you here soon.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more about the podcast, myself, or our guests, you can go to afamilystory.org. You can also go to afamilystory.org if you'd like to give. This is a listener-supported podcast, and we are incredibly grateful for your generosity. Hey, we have a Facebook group, and it's pretty cool. Rethinking God with Tacos. You can join us over there. Lots of incredible conversation and community taking place on that page. And you can also follow us on all the socials, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and others. Hey, I'd love it also if you went on iTunes and left a review or shared or tweeted or liked the podcast. Let your friends know that this is a good place to hear about the love of God. I pray grace and wonder over your day.